Sheriff Mike Callahan's home had never been so thoroughly wired. In the 48 hours since confronting the fake HOA enforcers on his lawn, his modest ranch-style house had been transformed into an elaborate surveillance hub. FBI technicians had installed hidden cameras covering every angle of the property, while microphones were strategically placed throughout the interior. Unmarked vans with tinted windows were positioned 3 houses down and across the street, filled with monitoring equipment and agents ready to move. Testing, Mike spoke to an apparently empty living room. "How's the audio?" "Crystal clear, Sheriff," replied FBI Special Agent Diana Chen through his earpiece. She was coordinating the operation from the command post set up in Mike's garage, converted now into a miniature tactical center. Kyle is in position and ready for the call. Mike looked out his living room window. From the outside, his house appeared exactly as it always did. Same weathered mailbox, same slightly overgrown hedges. The only difference was the vacation notice C sign he placed on his front door that morning, instructing package deliveries to be left with a neighbor. That and the conspicuously loaded suitcases visible through the front window. "Are we sure the bait is attractive enough?" Mike asked, adjusting the small microphone clipped inside his shirt collar. "According to our profile, they prefer targets that seem organized and affluent, not wealthy enough for extensive security systems, but comfortable enough to have valuables," Chen responded. "Your sheriff's salary puts you right in their sweet spot." Mike couldn't help but chuckle. "Never thought my modest public servant's paycheck would make me an attractive mark." "It's also your predictability," added Agent Chen. "According to Kyle's statement, that's why they targeted you initially. Regular patterns, single-occupant, respectable profession." Mike sobered at the reminder. "Still can't believe they had me under surveillance. Makes you wonder how many other homes they've been watching." "That's what we're going to find out," Chen assured him. "We're ready when you are." Mike checked his watch. Kyle would be making the call in exactly 5 minutes, using a carefully rehearsed script that had been developed with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. The goal was to present Mike's home as an irresistible target, a small-town sheriff, leaving for a week-long fishing trip, a house full of potential valuables, and most importantly, an easily exploited schedule that made the timing predictable. "Remember," Mike said into his microphone, "we need whoever shows up to actually attempt entry. Just coming to the property isn't enough for the charges we want." "Understood, Sheriff," Chen replied. "We've briefed the team. No one moves until they make an overt act indicating intent to enter or until they use false credentials to approach a neighbor." Mike poured himself a cup of coffee, trying to settle the familiar tension that preceded any significant operation. In 23 years of law enforcement, he helped coordinate drug busts, armed standoffs, and multi-agency manhunts. But this one felt different, more personal. These weren't just criminals operating in his jurisdiction. They had specifically targeted his home, his neighbors, his community. Kyle's making the call. Agent Chen's voice interrupted his thoughts. Audio was being fed to your earpiece. Mike sat quietly, listening as Kyle's nervous voice spoke to someone identified only as Mr. Reynolds. "Yeah, I got a perfect new target," Kyle was saying. "Sheriff's house in Pinewood Acres. Guy's leaving for a week starting tomorrow. Fishing trip. Or something." There was a pause as the person on the other end spoke, their voice too faint for Mike to hear through Kyle's connection. No, it's solid info," Kyle continued. "I was at the bait shop when he was buying supplies, overheard him telling the owner he's heading to Lake Champlain for 7 days. Even saw him loading gear into his truck." Another pause, longer this time. "Address? Yeah, I got it. 47 Oakwood Drive. White ranch with blue shutters. Lives alone." Mike felt a strange sensation hearing his home described as a target. The clinical detachment he usually maintained during operations wavered momentarily. "Got a security system?" Kyle asked, presumably repeating a question. "Nah, just those basic door sensors. Small town, you know. Sheriff probably thinks nothing happens on his watch." The irony wasn't lost on Mike. "Tomorrow morning would be best," Kyle added. "He's leaving at 6. Usually stops for breakfast at Dot's Diner on his way out of town. Gives you a solid 20-minute window after he leaves." When the call ended, Agent Chen's voice returned to Mike's earpiece. They took the bait. "Mr. Reynolds said he's sending a property assessment team tomorrow at 6:30 a.m. "Property assessment team," Mike repeated with disgust. "Creative." Kyle did well, Chen noted. "The recording is excellent evidence of conspiracy." "If they show up," Mike cautioned, "they might smell a setup." "Our analysts don't think so. Kyle's story was credible, and they've had success in this area before. Overconfidence is on our side." The rest of the day passed in tense preparation. Mike packed his truck with fishing gear, maintaining the illusion for any watching eyes, while FBI technicians made final adjustments to their surveillance equipment. By evening, three more unmarked vehicles had subtly positioned themselves throughout the neighborhood, each containing agents prepared for rapid response. At 5:30 the next morning, Mike dressed in his fishing clothes, loaded the last of his gear into his truck, and prepared to leave as planned. The script called for him to depart at 6 o'clock sharp, exactly as Kyle had told Mr. Reynolds. All units in position, Agent Chen confirmed through his earpiece. Satellite surveillance shows two vehicles entering the area from the south, a white utility van and a dark sedan. They're currently parked 2 blocks away. Right on schedule, Mike observed, checking his tackle box one last time for appearance's sake. Any visual on occupants? 3 individuals in the van, 2 in the sedan. The van has magnetic signs reading Valley Property Services. Sedan appears to be a spotter vehicle. Mike nodded to himself. It matched the pattern they'd established. Professionals with preparation and coordination, not opportunistic thieves. I'm heading out, he announced, loud enough for the hidden microphones to catch. Remember, no one moves until they make an attempt to enter or explicitly misrepresent themselves. Understood, Sheriff. We'll maintain radio silence once you depart unless absolutely necessary. Mike climbed into his truck, backed out of the driveway, and drove slowly down Oakwood Drive. As he passed the darkened houses of his sleeping neighbors, he couldn't help but feel a surge of protective determination. Behind him, his empty house waited like a Venus flytrap, appearing vulnerable but primed to snap shut. In his rearview mirror, as he turned onto the main road, he caught a glimpse of a white van slowly pulling out on the side street. The trap was set. Now all they had to do was wait for the prey to take the bait. Dot's Diner sat on the edge of Pinewood County, a chrome-trimmed establishment that had been serving truckers and locals since the 1950s. Sheriff Mike Callahan sat in a corner booth, untouched breakfast before him, his attention fixed on the tablet discreetly propped against the napkin holder. On screen, a multi-camera view showed his empty house from various angles: living room, kitchen, front yard, back door. Van approaching from the east, Agent Chen's voice reported through his earpiece, Sedan maintaining position at the corner of Maple and Oakwood. Appears to be running surveillance. Mike checked his watch, 6:28 a.m., right on schedule. Sheriff, you seeing this? Chen asked as the white van with Valley Property Services magnetic signs pulled into Mike's driveway. Crystal clear, Mike confirmed, watching as 3 men exited the vehicle. Unlike the amateur crew that had confronted him days earlier, these individuals moved with practiced precision. They wore professional-looking uniforms, navy blue with embroidered logos, and carried clipboards and equipment cases that gave them the appearance of legitimate contractors. Audio coming through, Chen added. Mike listened as the men approached his front door. Their conversation was captured by the hidden microphones scattered throughout his property. Standard entry point assessment, the oldest of the 3 was saying. Marcus, check for secondary alarm triggers. Ethan, take the perimeter. They were methodical. Mike had to give them that. The leader examined the front door while the one called Marcus inspected the frame for signs of security contacts. The third man, Ethan, began a circuit of the house, checking windows and potential access points. Sir, Ethan called out after completing his loop, property is clear. No visible security beyond basic door sensors. No cameras detected. The leader nodded. Good. Let's proceed with property examination protocol. Mike suppressed a grim smile. Their protocol was a charade for anyone who might be watching. Neighbors, passing cars, security cameras. To casual observers, they appeared to be conducting a legitimate property inspection. The leader approached the front door and rang the doorbell. Once, twice, 3 times. At a reasonable precaution to ensure the house was truly empty. After waiting an appropriate interval, he reached into his equipment case and removed what appeared to be a locksmith's toolkit. We have overt action, Chen confirmed in Mike's ear. He's attempting entry. Mike watched intently as the man worked on his front door lock with professional efficiency. It took less than 30 seconds before the door swung open. All 3 men entered the house, closing the door behind them. The interior cameras activated, showing the men as they moved through his living room. Commence standard protocol, the leader instructed. Ethan, master bedroom. Marcus, office and electronics. 45 seconds per room, focus on transportables. Comms check every 3 minutes. They dispersed efficiently, each heading to different areas of the house. Mike watched as they began systematically searching through his belongings, checking drawers, examining electronic devices, looking through cabinets. Sir, Marcus called from the office, found a gun safe. Standard police issue. The leader appeared in the doorway. Leave it. Too heavy, likely alarmed. Focus on jewelry, cash, devices. Mike felt a surge of anger watching these strangers pawing through his possessions, even though everything of real value had been removed in preparation for the sting. Hold positions, Chen suddenly instructed through the earpiece. We have movement from the sedan. 2 individuals approaching the house. appears to be a secondary team. On the tablet, Mike could see two more men walking up his driveway. Unlike the contractors already inside, these individuals wore suits and carried identification badges visible from their breast pockets. New development, Chem's voice had an edge of excitement. These may be the supervisors. The newcomers rang the doorbell and one of the men inside, Ethan, opened it after checking through the peephole. "Mr. Reynolds?" he asked uncertainly. Mike straightened in his booth. Reynolds, the same name Kyle had called the apparent coordinator of the operation. Assessment proceeding as expected. The older of the two newcomers asked, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Yes, sir," the team leader responded, emerging from the hallway. "Property matches intelligence. Low security, good inventory." Reynolds nodded approvingly, surveying the living room. "What's the estimated value?" "Preliminary assessment suggests $60,000 to $70,000 in transportables. High-end electronics, potential safe contents, jewelry noted in master bedroom." "Excellent." Reynolds checked his watch. "Complete your assessment and prepare for removal. Transport team will arrive at 700. The second suited man, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. "Timeline for completion? 15 minutes maximum," the team leader assured him. Reynolds seemed satisfied. "Good. Henderson will coordinate the asset distribution once." He stopped mid-sentence, his head tilting slightly as he focused on something on Mike's mantelpiece. Mike watched on the tablet as Reynolds approached a framed photograph, one that had been deliberately left in place. It showed Mike in his sheriff's uniform at last year's county fair, shaking hands with the governor. "This is the sheriff," Reynolds said, his voice suddenly tense. "The homeowner is the county sheriff." The atmosphere in the room instantly changed. Intelligence said it was a fishing trip. The team leader protested. "Kyle confirmed." "Kyle Matthews?" Reynolds interrupted. "The same Kyle Matthews who was arrested 3 days ago. The same Kyle who suddenly called yesterday after dropping off the grid." Mike could see the realization spreading across their faces like a stain. "It's a setup," the second suited man concluded, already backing toward the door. "Asset recovery canceled. Exit protocol 7. That was all Agent Chen needed. All units execute," she commanded. On the tablet, Mike watched as FBI agents swarmed his property from multiple directions. The men inside froze momentarily and scattered in panic, but each exit was already covered. Even the sedan parked at the corner was surrounded before its driver could react. Mike was already on his feet, throwing cash on the table to cover his untouched breakfast. By the time he reached his truck, Chen was updating him through the earpiece. "All suspects in custody. No resistance. Clean operation." Mike drove back to his house, arriving just as agents were leading the handcuffed men to transport vehicles. He spotted Reynolds, distinguished-looking with silver hair and an expensive suit now rumpled from his arrest, being escorted to a separate FBI vehicle. Agent Chen met Mike in the driveway, unable to contain her satisfaction. Thomas Reynolds, age 57. Former real estate developer with a history of fraud investigations but no convictions. Our initial search on his phone shows connections to similar operations in 7 states. "The second man?" Mike asked. "James Henderson, his financial manager. Early forensics on their devices indicate they've been running these crews for nearly 3 years, different teams using different covers. HOA enforcement was just one of their approaches. They also posed as utility workers, building inspectors, even census takers." Mike watched as the last of the suspects was driven away. "How many victims?" "Preliminary estimate is over 200 households across the eastern seaboard, primarily targeting elderly homeowners and properties where occupants followed predictable routines. Total estimated theft exceeding $4 million. Chen shook her head. "And that's just what we can trace so far." "And Kyle?" Mike asked, thinking of the young man whose cooperation had made this possible. "His cooperation will be noted in sentencing recommendations. He's young enough to turn his life around." Mike nodded, surveying his front yard, now empty of both criminals and agents, returning to its ordinary suburban appearance. The grass still needed finishing from where he'd been interrupted days earlier. The whole affair had begun with a simple lawn mowing and ended with dismantling a multi-state criminal enterprise. "You know," Chin said, following his gaze to the half-mowed lawn, "you had a knack for this kind of operation. The Bureau could use someone with your instincts." Mike chuckled. "Appreciate the offer, but I'm where I need to be. Pinewood County has been my home for 15 years. These are my neighbors, my community." Chet nodded in understanding. "Sometimes the most important jurisdiction is the one right under your feet." As she departed with the last of the federal agents, Mike retrieved his mower from the garage. The morning was still young, and he had a lawn to finish. As he pulled the starter cord, he reflected on how a simple case of fake HOA enforcers had unraveled into something much larger. In his 23 years of law enforcement, Mike had learned one truth above all others. There was no such thing as a small crime, only small thinking. Every violation, every scam, every moment of taking advantage of the vulnerable was a tear in the community fabric. And mending those tears, whether as sheriff or simply as a neighbor, was what mattered most. He pushed the mower forward, cutting a clean, straight line through. The interrogation room at the Pinewood County Sheriff's Department was deliberately austere. Bare walls, fluorescent lighting that buzzed faintly, and a metal table bolted to the floor. Sheriff Mike Callahan sat across from Kyle Matthews, the youngest of the fake HOA enforcers who now looked even younger without his counterfeit uniform. "Let's go through it again," Mike said, opening a folder containing printouts of similar incidents reported across 3 counties. "Who organized this operation?" Kyle fidgeted with the sleeve of his orange jumpsuit. "I already told you it was Darren's idea. He said it was perfect because people are scared of getting fined by their HOAs. Mike pushed a photograph across the table, a driver's license for Darren Wells showing a completely different person than the man they'd arrested. Darren Wells doesn't exist. The real owner of this identity is a 72-year-old retiree in Florida. Kyle's eyes widened. He told us his name was Darren. I figured that much, Mike replied dryly. What about Marcus, the guy in the van? I don't know much about him. He joined about a month ago. Darren, or whatever his name is, brought him in. Mike made a note. Marcus Heller, a driver who'd fled the scene, had been apprehended 2 miles away when he crashed the van into a ditch. Inside, they discovered property from at least 12 different homes, electronics, jewelry, and several strong boxes that had clearly been forced open. Here's where I don't understand, Mike continued. The 3 of you were working the front, distracting homeowners with fake HOA violations. Meanwhile, Marcus was supposed to enter the houses and steal valuables. But you were at my place at 5:30 in the morning. Nobody plans a distraction that early unless you're targeting someone specific. Kyle's gaze dropped to the table. Kyle, Mike's voice softened slightly. We've got you on multiple charges. Cooperation is the only card you have left to play. After a long moment, Kyle looked up. It wasn't random. We would target people with schedules. People who are predictable. Go on. Darren had a list. People who leave for work at specific times or who have routines we could disrupt. We'd watch for patterns, when they get mail, when they water plants, when they walk dogs. Mike leaned forward. And how did I get on this list? You mowed your lawn every Saturday at 9 a.m. Like clockwork. Except last weekend you didn't. So Darren figured you'd do it soon, probably early before your shift. He said law enforcement people are the easiest marks because they never think crime will happen to them. A flicker of realization crossed Kyle's face. But I'm guessing he didn't know you were the sheriff. Mike allowed himself a thin smile. Apparently not. He spread out more photographs, surveillance footage from various neighborhoods showing the same van parked for hours at different locations. These scams have been happening for over a year, Mike said. Not just in Pinewood. There were similar reports in Westlake and Granville. Same memo, different faces. Kyle's shoulders slumped. Darren said he'd done this before. That's why he knew it would work. He's not the mastermind, Mike stated flatly. Someone more organized is running this. I never met anyone else, Kyle protested. Just Darren, Marcus, and Neil. Mike pulled out his phone and scrolled to a text message. This came in 20 minutes ago from the FBI field office in Portsmouth. They've been tracking similar schemes across the eastern seaboard. Fake utility workers, bogus building inspectors, and yes, counterfeit HOA representatives. All targeting affluent neighborhoods, all using the same approach. Kyle swallowed hard. I didn't know it was that big. 12 incidents in our county alone in the past 6 months, Mike continued. Elderly residents bullied into letting strangers into their homes. Veterans with PTSD triggered by false authority figures pounding on their doors. A woman with dementia who handed over her late husband's war medals because someone in a uniform told her she was violating community guidelines by displaying military paraphernalia. With each example, Kyle seemed to shrink further into his chair. I'd want a name, Mike said. Who recruited Darren? I don't know, Kyle insisted. I really don't. Mike studied the young man's face, detecting genuine fear rather than deception. He changed tactics. How did you get involved? I needed money for tuition, Kyle admitted. I dropped out last semester when my student loans fell through. Was washing dishes at the grill when Darren came in. Heard me complaining about debt. He offered me cash. Said it was just a job acting as security for private properties. Mike nodded. A familiar story, financial desperation creating willing accomplices. What about the handcuffs? Where did those come from? Darren gave them to me 2 days ago. Said some homeowners had been difficult and we might need to detain them until they cooperated. I didn't. I never thought we actually used them. A knock at the door interrupted them. Deputy Hanson entered, holding a tablet. "Sheriff, we got the warrant for Wells' phone records. You're going to want to see this." Mike glanced at the screen, noting a recurring number with an out-of-state area code. The texts were clearly coded, but their meaning was obvious to anyone in law enforcement. Addresses, schedules, instructions for collection. "Kyle," Mike said, turning back to the young man, "I think you're about to become very valuable to a federal investigation." Kyle looked up, confusion and hope mingling on his face. "How?" "Because tomorrow," Mike replied, pocketing the tablet, "we're going to have you call this number and tell them you found the perfect target, a small-town sheriff who was about to go on vacation, leaving his house unattended for a week." For the first time since his arrest, something like purpose flickered in Kyle's eyes. "You want to set them up. I want you to help us stop people who are exploiting the vulnerable," Mike corrected, "starting with whoever is on the other end of this phone number." As he left the interrogation room, Mike glanced at his watch. It was nearly noon, his lawn still half-mowed, his workday derailed. But for the first time in months, he felt the satisfaction of a case with real momentum. What had begun as a strange confrontation in his front yard was unraveling something much larger. And as sheriff of Pinewood County, Mike Callahan was exactly where he needed to be, one step ahead of those who thought they could prey on his community. Time seemed to freeze in Sheriff Mike Callahan's front yard. The badge in his hand gleamed like a small sun, and the effect it had on the 3 HOA enforcers was immediate. The tall one's clipboard lowered slightly, his authoritative facade cracking. The youngest one, the one with the handcuffs, took another step back, nearly tripping over his own feet. "There must be some confusion," the tall one said, his voice now stripped of its official tone. "We're just doing our job ensuring community standards." "Cut the act," Mike interrupted. "Pinewood County doesn't have an HOA enforcement division with detention authority. That's not how homeowners associations work." He took a deliberate step forward. "Now who's in the van?" The 3 men exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. Mike had seen this dance before, the moment when criminals realized their options were disappearing. "Nobody," the nervous one said too quickly. Mike reached for his phone. "I'm calling this in." Impersonating officials, attempted fraud, possible breaking and entering. He looked pointedly at the handcuffs. "Illegal restraint. That's enough to keep you occupied for a while." The young one panicked. It was Darren's idea. He said rich neighborhoods are easy targets. People don't question a uniform. "Shut up, Kyle," the tall one, apparently Darren, hissed. Before Mike could respond, the van's engine roared to life. All heads turned to see it lurch forward, tires squealing as it accelerated down the quiet suburban street. "And there goes your wheelman," Mike observed calmly, already dialing. "Deputy Hanson." "Mike here. I need a patrol car to intercept a gray 40 Econoline heading east from Pinewood Acres. License plate." He squinted as the van rounded a corner, memorizing the partial plate he could see. "Starts with JRT. 3 suspects in my front yard, 1 fleeing in the vehicle." While speaking, Mike positioned himself between the 3 men and the street, making any attempt to run a direct confrontation. He noted with professional detachment how quickly their team had fractured under pressure. The youngest one, Kyle, looked ready to confess to crimes he hadn't even committed yet. "Here's what's going to happen," Mike said after ending the call. "You're going to place those fake IDs and any weapons on the ground and sit down with your hands visible. Deputy Hanson will be here in 3 minutes. In the meantime, I'd like to know how many houses you've hit in my county." "We haven't actually taken anything yet," the nervous one offered, clearly hoping cooperation might help his case. "Not for lack of trying," Mike countered. "How long have you been working this scam?" Darren's expression hardened, but the other 2 seemed relieved to talk. Kyle was particularly forthcoming once he started. "About 6 weeks," he said, ignoring Darren's glare. "We've been through Oak Ridge, Milltown, and started here yesterday. Darren scouts neighborhoods first, looking for easy targets, older residents, people who seem intimidated by authority." Mike felt his jaw tighten. "And the handcuffs, were those just for show?" Kyle looked down. "We never actually used them. Darren said having them would make people cooperate if they got suspicious." The sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Darren made a last, desperate calculation, his eyes darting toward the gap between neighboring houses. Mike recognized the look immediately. "Don't," he warned. "Running turns this from bad to worse." But Darren bolted anyway, sprinting across the dewy grass toward the fence line. Mike didn't pursue. He simply pressed a button on his phone. "Hanson, suspect heading toward Maple Street. White male, 6 feet, dark uniform." In the distance, a patrol car changed direction, cutting through the connecting street. Darren made it halfway over the fence before flashlights caught him, followed by commands to freeze. Back in Mike's yard, Kyle and the nervous one had already seated themselves on the ground, seemingly relieved that decisions were now out of their hands. "How'd you know we weren't real?" Kyle asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Mike contemplated the young man. He couldn't be more than 22, not much older than Mike's own son. Besides operating before dawn and claiming jurisdiction over a neighborhood that doesn't exist, Mike knelt to secure Kyle's wrists with actual authorized restraints. Real authority doesn't need to intimidate. The moment you tried to scare me, I knew you were faking it. As Deputy Hanson's car pulled up, Mike wondered how many elderly residents had been frightened into compliance by these fraudsters, and how many others might be running the same scam in different counties. One thing was certain: his investigation was far from over. Sheriff Mike Callahan wasn't in the habit of mowing his lawn before sunrise, but a week-long investigation had left his property maintenance at the bottom of his priority list. The rhythmic hum of the mower at 5:30 a.m. matched his exhaustion. 48 hours without proper sleep, yet here he was trying to avoid a neighborly dispute over grass height. Pinewood County might have been small, but its problems rarely allowed him a full night's rest. The beam of flashlights cutting through the early morning mist was his first indication that something was off. Mike killed the engine, the sudden silence more startling than the noise had been. 3 figures approached from the street, moving with the exaggerated authority of men playing at power. Property owner. The call came sharp and official sounding. This is the Lakeside Estates Homeowners Association Enforcement Division. We need to speak with you immediately. Mike squinted through the dim light. Lakeside Estates? He lived in Pinewood Acres, had for 15 years. And in those 15 years, their sleepy HOA had never once assembled an enforcement division, let alone one that operated before dawn. The tallest figure stepped forward, clipboard in hand, wearing what appeared to be a security uniform with a patch Mike couldn't quite make out. Sir, we've received multiple complaints about your property. According to our records, you're in violation of Code 457B, improper lawn maintenance. We're authorized to issue citations and, if necessary, detain uncooperative residents. Mike straightened, taking in the 3 men. The tall one with the clipboard had the confident stance of someone used to intimidation. The other 2 hung back slightly, one shifting nervously, the younger one fingering what looked disturbingly like handcuffs attached to his belt. Gentlemen, Mike said carefully, I think there's been a misunderstanding. This isn't Lakeside Estates. The tall man's smile didn't reach his eyes. The property lines were recently reassessed. Your parcel now falls under our jurisdiction. Mike had spent 23 years in law enforcement, 15 as sheriff. He knew a con when he saw one. The patches on their uniforms were cheap knockoffs of actual security credentials, the clipboards likely filled with counterfeit documents, and the reassessment claim was absurd. Property line changes would have generated paperwork that would have crossed his desk. Is that right? Mike kept his tone neutral. And who exactly authorized this enforcement division? The HOA board voted on it last month. The nervous one piped up, his voice cracking slightly. Standard procedure. And you're authorized to detain people? Mike asked, nodding toward the handcuffs. The tall one stepped closer. Only when necessary. Now we need to see some identification and proof of residence. Mike noticed a beat-up van parked at the curb, its side door slightly ajar. Through the gap he could see stacked boxes. In the growing light he made out what looked like small appliances, microwaves, coffee makers, televisions. Everything clicked. The HOA enforcers were running a distraction scam, get homeowners outside arguing about nonsense violations while an accomplice slipped in through an unlocked door or window. They'd likely been working the neighborhood for days, watching patterns, noting when houses were empty. Of course, Mike said, reaching slowly toward his back pocket. I have my ID right here. The tall man nodded, his posture relaxing slightly. But instead of a wallet, Mike produced his badge, letting it catch the first rays of sunrise. Sheriff Mike Callahan, Pinewood County. Now, why don't you boys tell me about this enforcement division of yours? The color drained from all 3 faces simultaneously, and the one with the handcuffs took an instinctive step backward. The gagement changed, and everyone knew it.